Rock Hudson named 5 men with whom he had an affair. Few stars shone brighter during the golden age of Hollywood than Rock Hudson. His chiseled jaw, towering 6'5" frame, and magnetic screen presence, capturing the very ideal of American masculinity. He was a study in the very definition of a leading man, one whose cool, confident demeanor left women swooning and men envying his smooth charm. For millions of moviegoers who watched him in the 1950s and 1960s, Rock Hudson wasn't just a movie star, he was the very definition of what a man should be. That carefully constructed image made him one of Hollywood's most bankable stars. But it also required him to live one of the industry's most outlandish lies. Behind the manufactured romance of his short, studio-arranged marriage and his on-screen chemistry with stars like Doris Day lay a profoundly different reality. Rock Hudson was gay, living a secretive private life during an era when exposure could have destroyed his career, even subjected him to criminal prosecution. Hudson's fame trapped him in a life he could never fully control. As one longtime friend explained, Rock lived in a prison of his own fame. He had created a persona worth millions to the studios. Yet that same persona made it impossible for him to live authentically. The bigger he became as a star, the more dangerous it became for him to be himself. When he died in 1985 from complications related to AIDS, he became the first major celebrity publicly associated with the disease, forcing America to face both the epidemic and the truth about his sexual orientation. In the decades since, a fuller picture of his private life has emerged through memoirs, legal documents, and the accounts of those who knew him personally. What many people still don't understand is that Rock didn't seek out casual encounters. He sought connection. These were not anonymous affairs. He formed relationships, built emotional bonds, and created as close to a domestic life as his circumstances allowed. Hudson's relationships reveal a great deal more than secret romance. They show the emotional cost of living a divided existence during one of America's most repressive eras. Each connection involved extraordinary risk at a time when exposure meant career death and possible criminal charges. The men who loved him faced their own burdens, knowing they could never publicly acknowledge their relationships and would remain invisible to the world. Through these stories, we see not simply Rock Hudson, the closeted star, but a man longing for the same intimacy and understanding everyone desires, yet forced to pursue it in the shadows. Number 1. Mark Christian. Of all Rock Hudson's relationships, none became more publicly known or more complex than his connection with Mark Christian, Hudson's final significant partner. After Hudson's death in 1985, Christian was thrust into the media spotlight, becoming both a symbol of the AIDS crisis and a key figure in a major legal case that faced issues of privacy, disclosure, and responsibility. Christian, a handsome blonde man in his 20s, met Hudson in 1982, when Hudson was 56. Although no longer in his cinematic prime, Hudson remained an influential industry figure. Their connection was immediate and deep, shifting quickly from dating to a committed partnership. Within months, Christian moved into Hudson's Beverly Hills home, forming what was essentially a domestic relationship, though hidden from the public. Their relationship blossomed during those early years of the AIDS epidemic, when fear and little medical understanding were the backdrop. According to court documents, Hudson was diagnosed with AIDS in June 1984, but didn't reveal his condition to Christian as the relationship continued. When the couple finally broke up for unrelated reasons in early 1985, the truth was not known. It wasn't until July 1985, after Hudson collapsed in Paris and the world learned that he had AIDS, that Christian learned the man he had lived with and loved was gravely ill. Feeling betrayed and terrified, Christian filed a lawsuit against Hudson's estate, claiming that Hudson had both a moral and legal responsibility to disclose his condition. The case generated national debate. Christian's lawyers argued for a right to informed consent, while Hudson's estate insisted that medical understanding of the disease was sufficiently limited at the time to preclude proof of intent or knowledge of transmission. After awarding more than $21 million, the jury verdict was reduced to $5.5 million, a landmark judgment that set a new legal precedent regarding health disclosure between sexual partners. The case made Christian a polarizing figure. Some people viewed him as opportunistic. Others did as a victim fighting for basic rights. Those who knew both men said the truth was far more complicated. Christian had been deeply involved with Hudson and was suddenly thrust into the spotlight, being forced to confront not just the possibility of a fatal illness, but the public exposure of his relationship in a deeply homophobic era. Although repeatedly testing negative for HIV, he lived with years of psychological strain, scrutiny, and painful questions about the man he had loved. In Hudson's story, Christian represents the contradictions of his time, an era in which a person's career could be ruined when they came out, when AIDS was deadly and barely understood, and when same-sex partners enjoyed few protections and little understanding under the law. A private romance that had evolved in secret ultimately caused a very public shift in America's understanding of the real lives behind the polished images of Hollywood. Mark Christian was more than just a lover. He was the surviving partner of the secret. And it is through his actions that the world was forced, finally, to see Rock Hudson as he actually was, not as the studios would have him be. Number 2. Lee Garlington. In the early 1960s, while Rock Hudson was one of the most famous leading men in the world, he had a quiet relationship with Lee Garlington, a young film extra. Whereas Hudson's later partner, Mark Christian, became publicly known because of the legal battles the two men fought, Garlington kept his relationship with Hudson hidden for decades. He finally came forward with the truth almost 30 years after Hudson died. According to film historian Margaret Collins, Garlington was Hudson's boyfriend at the height of his fame when he was starring in romantic comedies with Doris Day and projecting the image of an ideal straight heartthrob. The stakes of exposure were huge, and any slip could have destroyed Hudson's career. The relationship began in 1962 after the two had been introduced through a mutual friend. Things turned serious rather quickly and lasted about 3 years during one of the most scrutinized periods of Hudson's life, when the studios held tight control over his public image. Because of this intense scrutiny, the relationship had to be kept completely secret. Garlington later described how he always left through the back door of Hudson's home and how they had to maintain separate arrivals and exits whenever they spent time together. They couldn't risk going to parties as a couple, traveling openly, or living without constant fear that someone might notice even the smallest sign of closeness. Even in the privacy of Hudson's own home, caution was always required. Household staff could talk, and unexpected visitors were a real threat. Garlington later reflected that Hudson was the most romantic man he had ever known, but they couldn't even hold hands in public. That simple statement captures the contradiction of their relationship, a true love that was forced to exist completely in the shadows, where even small affectionate gestures must be carefully hidden. Living under such conditions created profound emotional strain. In the early 1960s, homosexuality was still considered a mental illness, was criminalized in most of the country, and was condemned by mainstream society. Psychologists who have studied the era note that men like Hudson and Garlington weren't only hiding their relationship from the public, but were also battling internalized shame created by cultural and societal pressures. Despite this, Garlington recalled moments of deep tenderness. Hudson, who projected rugged masculinity on screen, was privately affectionate and thoughtful, surprising him with roses and other small romantic gestures that no one else ever knew about. These moments existed in a hidden world parallel to Hudson's public life. The relationship ultimately ended after a moment that seems trivial today, but was dangerous in their era. Garlington once opened Hudson's car door for him at a gas station, a simple gesture that implied intimacy. Shortly after, Hudson ended the relationship, telling Garlington that his manager had photographs of them together taken inside Hudson's home. Hudson feared the images could lead to exposure or blackmail. Even the slightest suspicion could destroy everything, and Hudson lived in constant awareness that his career supported not just himself but agents, managers, and studio executives who depended on his carefully crafted image. After their breakup, they occasionally crossed paths on studio lots but kept their distance. Garlington later married a woman, had children, and never spoke publicly about his past with Hudson until the 2000s, when the world had changed enough for him to feel safe telling the truth. His reflection, that Hudson once gave him roses and no one ever knew, symbolizes both the love they shared and the painful secrecy that governed every part of their relationship. Number 3. George Nader. Not all of Rock Hudson's closest relationships were romantic. Some were deeply emotional bonds that mixed friendship, loyalty, and occasional intimacy in ways that defy simple labeling. One of the most significant of these was his decades-long connection with actor George Nader, a fellow Universal contract player during the 1950s. According to film historian Robert Anderson, Nader was part of Hudson's innermost circle and was one of few who knew the full truth about Hudson's life. Their relationship evolved over many years, but remained rooted in trust, shared experience, and mutual protection in an industry where it was impossible to be openly gay. Nader appeared in a string of films, including Robot Monster and The Female Animal, and he and Hudson met while both were under contract at Universal. Insiders from the era frequently said the two men were lovers at some point, though whether their relationship was romantic or purely emotional will never be clear. What is not in doubt is that they shared a deep bond. They were part of that very discreet network of gay actors and industry personnel who looked out for one another with the hope of avoiding exposure. This network provided quiet alibis, safe gatherings, and the illusion of heterosexual dating when the need arose. Those who worked with both men say that Nader was more than a friend. He was part of the chosen family that understood Hudson's fears and helped maintain the wall between his public image and private reality. The depth of this trust was such that Hudson appointed Nader heir to his personal papers and letters, which could have included explicit details of Hudson's private life. Hudson had full confidence in Nader, who would keep his secrets even beyond Hudson's grave. Indeed, according to most accounts, Nader did exactly that, examining the documents carefully and destroying most of the personal items to protect the privacy of his friend Hudson. His decision placed loyalty above historical curiosity or financial benefit and showed the extraordinary bond of these two individuals. Their relationship also withstood enormous difficulties. In 1965, Nader's career came to an abrupt close when Confidential magazine threatened to publish an article about his arrest at a gay gathering. According to numerous accounts, a deal was arranged wherein Nader took the blame in order to protect Hudson, whose career was far more valuable to the studio system. Nader became the sacrifice, and his Hollywood career was over. Rather than tarnishing their bond, this event seemed to fortify it. Nader moved to Europe, rebuilt his life as a writer, and remained close to Hudson for decades. Even as Hudson's fame grew while Nader's career dimmed, their connection never faded. In the later years of their lives, both men carved out quieter personal spaces in which they could be more real. And through all the changes, they remained constants in each other's worlds. George Nader represented a rare kind of loyalty and understanding that went beyond friendship or romance. He was part of the family that helped Hudson survive a life that demanded constant performance and relentless secrecy. Number 4. An unidentified Marine. The lost love, an unknown Marine. Among the significant relationships in Rock Hudson's life, perhaps most poignant and mysterious was a young Marine he is said to have met in the early 1950s. This relationship, say people close to Hudson, represented one of his few tastes of uninhibited, genuine romance before the weight of stardom made such relationships increasingly difficult. Rock was known to visit military bars while filming near the coast, explained celebrity biographer Thomas Henderson. This was the era of the Korean War, with military personnel very visible in Southern California. For someone like Hudson, still climbing the ladder to stardom, but not yet so famous that he was instantly recognized everywhere. These venues offered rare anonymity and the opportunity to meet men outside Hollywood scrutiny. According to several of the sources close to Hudson at the time, in 1952 he picked up a young Marine at one of these places while on location for a film near San Diego. An initial casual encounter reportedly blossomed into something much more over several months of clandestine meetings. One friend said Rock fell hard for a quiet, blue-collar Marine, but the man disappeared, noted Henderson. Unlike Hudson's relationships with industry insiders who understood the necessary deceptions of Hollywood, this connection apparently had a more straightforward quality, something closer to normal dating, though always conducted with extreme discretion. This Marine, whose name has been lost to history, was said to have been sent to Korea during the ongoing conflict there. Months later, Hudson reportedly received word that the young man had died in action, which devastated him when his career was just beginning its steep incline. There were rumors, he says, that he might have died in Korea, which devastated rock. It's claimed that this had occurred precisely at that time when Hudson was making the transition from contract player to actual star, rendering an agonizing contrast between professional ascendance and personal tragedy. Because he could not publicly acknowledge the relationship or the grief which followed, he had to mourn in silence, while projecting the carefree bachelor image Universal Studios and his agent Henry Wilson were so carefully creating for him. The timing of this romance and its tragic end coincided with a period when Hudson's public image was being shaped most aggressively. As his fame increased, so did the restrictions on his private life, making the simple, unconstrained connection he had reportedly had with the young Marine increasingly impossible to reproduce. He was never the same after that, claimed a longtime friend. He'd found real love and lost it before anyone even knew it. This loss created a pattern that would follow Hudson for decades, a division between his authentic self and his public persona, between genuine emotional connection and the performances of normal relationships demanded by his career. But what really makes this relationship so particularly significant is how it allegedly influenced Hudson's approach to love afterward. According to those close to him, this early heartbreak created an emotional caution, a protective distance that helped him survive the compartmentalization his life required, but may have made true vulnerability more difficult. The unknown Marine represents not only a personal loss, but a symbolic one, the road not taken. Had the era been different, had Hudson been just an ordinary man rather than a rising star, had the Marine returned safely from war, Hudson's personal life might have followed a very different path. He had found real love and lost it before anyone even knew, and that grief remained mostly unspoken. It shaped him in ways the public never saw, leaving him to mourn privately while maintaining the cheerful facade of Hollywood's leading man. Number 5. Tab Hunter. The rumored romance with Tab Hunter represents one of Hollywood's most intriguing might-have-been stories. It speaks to a connection between two of the era's most popular male stars, both living deeply closeted lives while portraying idealized heterosexual leading men on screen. Though it was never confirmed by either man during Hudson's lifetime, long-standing accounts from industry insiders suggest they shared a brief but meaningful relationship, one that reveals the hidden complexities of gay life in 1950s Hollywood. At the time, Tab Hunter was deeply closeted as well, says noted film historian Margaret Collins. Both of them were in practically the same position, young, extraordinarily handsome leading men whose careers were dependent upon maintaining a spotless heterosexual image. According to those familiar with Hollywood's underground gay community, Hudson and Hunter are said to have hooked up in the late 1950s, when both were at or near the height of their popularity. Hunter, with his blonde all-American image, had become a teen idol and hit recording artist, while Hudson was making the transition from dramatic leading roles to the romantic comedies that would cement his status as a superstar. Both publicly denied any romantic involvement, but multiple insiders claimed that they indeed had a short, passionate affair. It would have been an enormous risk. Two major stars with carefully crafted public personas, fan bases built on heterosexual appeal, and studios that had invested huge sums in presenting them as ideal romantic partners for women. The logistical challenges alone would have been overwhelming. Both were constantly monitored by fan magazines, gossip columnists, studio publicity teams, and the press, all eager for personal details. Any hint of impropriety could have triggered investigations that might have ended their careers. "We all knew each other, and we all knew how to keep secrets," Tab Hunter reportedly said years later, after both he and Hudson had been publicly outed posthumously. Though vague, the statement acknowledged the existence of a hidden support network of gay actors who quietly protected one another at a time when exposure meant social and professional ruin. This was a discreet community that allowed what some historians describe as a parallel Hollywood to exist behind the glamorous facade. Here, closeted stars could find genuine connection and honesty sometimes, even if it was only for moments. Two matinee idols pretending for the world and maybe briefly just being honest together, observed Collins. If their rumored relationship did occur, it represented a rare moment of authenticity in two lives defined by relentless performance. The moment in which both could set aside the exhausting demands of appearing heterosexual and simply be themselves with someone who understood completely. The alleged romance likely ended not because of scandal or betrayal, but through a mutual recognition of its impossibility. The pressures around them both made any kind of long-term connection unsustainable. While the two remained friendly in later years, in public they maintained polite professional distance. Eventually, Hunter came out in his 2005 autobiography, though he referred to Hudson only as a friendly acquaintance preserving the old code of discretion. Even decades later, certain confidences remain protected. Two matinee idols play-acting to the world, and, perhaps for a brief moment, just being truthful with each other. This encapsulates the emotional veracity of the supposed affair, a momentary flash of truth and connection between two men compelled to mask who they were. A small but meaningful reprieve from the constant performance that defined their public lives.